I'll start with a little welcome and opening. We have most of the folks on the call are already aware of the project, but for the benefit of those of you who are new, we'll just go over what the project is about for a couple of minutes. Then I will go over the overall updates on progress and what's been done since our last meeting in Oxford, February. Then I'll pass over to Marcelo, who will give you an overview of updates on the tools and resources related to the project. And Chris will update us on the sourcing regions research that's been done so far. Then we'll hand over to Sebastian, who will update us on the risk analysis work that Proforest has been doing. And then we'll close the webinar. You'll notice that there's Q&A throughout, so if you have any questions or any comments, please feel free to ask those throughout the webinar. There will be 5 minutes after each section for questions and comments. So the objective of this webinar is to update the members and project partners on the progress, to provide an overview of stakeholder engagement and partner outreach to date, as well as next steps on that, to provide an overview of the preliminary results of the supply chain mapping and risk analysis activities, and to provide a space to clarify doubts and discuss next steps. So before I go on to progress, as most of you know, what we're trying to do with the Soy Buyers Coalition is bring the members of the project closer to what's happening on the ground in Brazil. Most of you are familiar with TRACE. What the tool is able to do is map the flows of soy from the municipality level to the port level. And what we're trying to do is put together a coalition of companies who will provide whatever data they have, and Chris will talk more about the data part later, to fill in the gaps. So where does it go from the port to the company/product level? This project is focused on deforestation. So what we're trying to do is enact projects on the ground based on where most of the volumes are coming from and other criteria that focus on pushing towards, at a minimum, zero net deforestation. Now, this question came up, why zero net? At CGF, our resolution is on zero net deforestation, so that's the minimum we're shooting for. That doesn't mean that the project that we work on the ground will be focused necessarily on zero net deforestation. It may make more sense to look at conversion. It may make more sense to look at zero deforestation, and so on. It honestly depends on what we end up looking at when we choose the areas that we want to focus on the ground. So having said all that, so what's the progress so far on member onboarding? So far we have 5 companies that have signed the NDA. As we mentioned a few times, once you've signed the NDA, you become an official member, an official industry member of the project. So the companies that are signed are 3 retailers, 1 feed manufacturer, and 1 consumer goods manufacturer. We have a number of companies who are also in the pipeline for signing the NDA. I think a number of you have asked if it's too late to sign on. It's absolutely not too late to sign on. We still welcome companies. We'll continue with the data analysis part as that comes in, but that doesn't mean that you can't join as that work is being done. We are also working on the recruitment of other companies and industry members on the project. Some of them are on this call. And finally, we are reaching out to local company representatives. We said at the beginning of the project that it's very important that we keep in touch with member representatives who are based in Brazil and who are closer to the actions on the ground and the actors on the ground as well. So we're continually reaching out to members who are based in Brazil and having discussions with them about the project. In terms of stakeholder engagement and communications, for this project, we have a group of advisors that we're putting together. The main groups that we've targeted so far are the Collaboration for Forests and Agriculture and the Accountability Framework Initiative. We picked these 2 particularly because CFA in particular is composed of experts who are very aware of the situation in Brazil in relation to soy and cattle. And because of the work that they're doing there, we thought it was very important to have them on board. So we presented the project to them in Brazil in March. They were open to being involved. They want to find out more, so we're providing that information to them. But to them, the project seemed promising. So that was a positive discussion we had with them there. And for the Accountability Framework Initiative, we are also going to reach out to them. Or Isabella, I think you're on the call. The latest news on that is that we have reached out to them. You might be muted, Isabella, or Marcelo.
Hi, we are about to. I was just waiting for the CFA email to go out first, so we'll do it now.
Well, that's gone out. All right, great. So in our interactions with potential group of advisors candidates, it's been quite positive so far. At the beginning of the project, we also talked about onboarding IDH as an implementation partner. That's a category that we didn't talk about too much in the beginning, but really an implementation partner's role is to help us when we actually start implementing projects on the ground. A caveat is that what we're trying to do is we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We will work with projects that are already taking place on the ground, but it's good to have an implementation partner in case there are projects that aren't in place in the areas that we should be focusing on. So that's where we see IDH's role being useful. They are happy to be more involved in the second part of the project, which is really about getting involved in those projects. For the first part, it's really about the companies and the industry members and all of the data analysis and risk analysis part. Other stakeholders we've reached out to the traders. We've reached out through the Soft Commodities Forum to inform them of the project. We've reached out also to individual traders, including Cargill, Bunge, Amaji, and Louis Dreyfus. And in general, the feedback is positive. They're keen to find out more. And one of the things that they appreciate is, as I said before, that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel and that we are going to try and plug into the credible projects that are already happening on the ground and put our weight behind those projects where it makes sense and where appropriate. So that was appreciated by the traders. We've also been reaching out to some financial organizations, namely the Moore Foundation. As a recent development, Rabobank is now a member of CGF, a new member of CGF, and we'll be reaching out to them as well. We've also reached out to the UK Soya Initiative, and there's nothing formal yet, but they're interested in seeing how we can work together and make sure that our projects align. And others, we've spoken to a number of other actors, such as the TFA 2020 initiative. We've reached out to, trying to think of who else, TFA Abiove as well. The Norwegian government as a potential funder, series, and so on. So when it makes sense, we have an informal discussion with these groups just to flag that this project is happening, what the project is about, so that they're aware of it when we go public with the project. Which brings me to my next point. A few of you will have seen the narrative for the project that we shared a few weeks ago. The narrative is completed. So the next steps for us is publishing the narrative. As a first step, we would like to publish the narrative as a blog. It won't be added as it is. We will modify a little bit. But in general, we'd like to start talking about the project a bit more publicly to alert other actors that this project is going on and start spreading the word. For industry members, you can use the narrative as well to talk about the project. It gives you an overview of what the project is about, what it's not about, and who is involved. So I will stop there and open up for questions from the group. Any questions? If there are no questions, we'll move on to the risk analysis part. Oh, sorry, not the risk analysis, the tools and resources. Marcelo, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. Deborah, can you move to next slide, please? Thanks. So as the main tools and resource we developed so far, We have the project outline, which that details all the technical and the governance aspects of the coalition. The draft narrative.
Oh, I think we lost Marcelo's sound.
Details the roles and what is expected from the advisors. And also the online platform that has been created to store and manage all the information and documents of the Soy Buyers Coalition. Deborah, if you can move to the next slide, please. Thanks. So the online platform, not sure if you have already had the chance to look at. We share the link for accessing it, so all the Soy Buyers Coalition members or participants can access it. And it's comprised by three main hubs of information. The first one is the shared documents folder, which stores all the documents or information that are not confidential. So documents, presentations, meeting notes, and the governance documents, and so on. The next one is the technical data folder, which is available just for some Proforest trace and CGF staff. That contains technical data related to the sourcing regions, the risk analysis, and initiatives. And the third one is the company's folder. This is only visible for those companies that have already signed off the data sharing agreement. So each individual company that has signed the NDA will have the grant to access each specific folder, and can store all the confidential information in there, the supply chain information, or any other confidential document or information. So one company will not be able to access other companies' folder. Also, of course, some Proforest trace and the TGF staff can access those folders as well. So this is the main tool for managing all the information of the Soy Buyers Coalition. And if you have any problem, any question on how to use it, please let us know. Okay, we are here to support you on using this online platform as well. So thank you. If you have any question on tools and resource, we can discuss it now. So if not, we can move to Trace to talk about the traceability aspects of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo. So my name is Chris West. I am the primary trace contact point for the Soy Buyers Coalition, and also the primary data contact point for the coalition. And just first off, I'd like to encourage you to do get in touch if you have any questions related to data or the Trace platform and the role of the Trace platform using email, or we can set up a phone call or a Skype if required. I work at the University of York within the York Centre of the Stockholm Environment Institute, which is one of the key partners on the TRACE programme. But throughout the Soy Bio's Coalition project, I'll be working closely with my colleagues in Stockholm, in the SCI office in Stockholm, and also members of staff from the Global Canopy programme as well. Next slide, please, Deborah. So I'm aware that many of you may not be familiar with the role of TRACE in this programme, and as Deborah highlighted earlier, what TRACE is trying to do with the data that we are pulling together is to identify the points of connections between subnational points of production, the actors involved in that production and trade, and then the consuming nations and import activity that goes on to link that production through to consumption activities. And that's essentially the role of TRACE within the Soy Buyers Coalition. Will be helping to identify linkages between Consumer Goods Forum member companies and other participants on the Soy Buyers Coalition and those regions of production and the trading actors that are involved in those supply chains. Part of what we're hoping to do with the use of company information is assess to what degree we have certainty into those connections. So how much of the supply chain can we say with confidence comes from different areas of production. And we're also hoping throughout this process in the pilot work that we're doing in the SBC to identify data gaps and opportunities to overcome those data gaps in future. We'll be working closely with Marcelo and his colleagues in ProForest to visualize the sourcing patterns and the associated impacts, risks, or benefits associated with that sourcing profile, to inform the selection of priority regions for further investigation, and eventually the selection of the interventions that we're hoping to identify as potential opportunities for interaction and investment in the region. And we'll also be supporting ProForest and others in connecting companies through to those pilot implementation projects. As Deborah indicated earlier, we also see the Soy Buyers Coalition as a longer-term endeavour and a longer-term partnership here. And what we're really hoping to get out of it in the longer term is by digesting and interpreting and analysing the data coming from companies in particular, what we're hoping to do is identify how we can streamline that process in future to make it easier in future to identify the upstream regions of productions that are associated with supply chains. We're also going to be working closely across the project to monitor progress over time in our priority regions and see how things are progressing in those regions. And finally, what we want to do as a learning outcome ourselves from this project is to see how we can improve the usability of our TRACE platform. And in particular, we have ambitions in the near future to start developing retailer and manufacturer-focused dashboards for TRACE to make your guys' jobs easier when it comes to analysing the data that sits within that platform. Next slide, please, Deborah. Thank you. So I just wanted to give a very brief overview of some of the initial work that we've been doing with the TRACE data. At the moment, we're still waiting for some of the company data to come through. So in the meantime, we've been looking primarily at just using the TRACE data and what information that provides to select some interesting areas for initial analysis. And what we've been doing here is creating heat maps of production and deforestation risk that link individual municipalities through to a number of European countries. And at the moment, we're focusing on Europe as a point of consumption based upon the membership at the moment of the Soy Buyers Coalition. We've been pooling that data together and aggregating that data together to identify which municipalities seem to be fairly important in aggregate in supplying the EU. And if you look at the right of this slide, you can see that based upon the information coming from TRACE across the production landscape in the recent past, so from 2014 to 2016, we're identifying in that map the top 50 municipalities which are producing soy for those EU countries. And we've started to identify interesting clusters of municipalities already that are likely to be the subject of further investigation as we go forward. So we have, for example, this western area of Mato Grosso on the western side of the map of Brazil there, which is obviously one of the hubs of soy production in Brazil. We also have another point in the southern Matopiba region, which those of you familiar with the Brazilian landscape of soy production will know is a hotspot of deforestation. And there's also a northern region in the Amazon basin, which we think has historically been cleared and deforested, but is now a kind of growing soy production area. So it's in a deforested area already, but offers a bit of contrast there in terms of a potential area where reforestation might be going on or other activities. The immediate next step in our assessment is to start to understand how consistent supply is from these particular regions of production to countries in the EU. And going forward, obviously, then what we're hoping to do is using the company data, provide more detailed connections at the product or product category level. And in doing this, what we're hoping to do is identify and further the development of the selection of priority areas that will be the target of risk analysis and intervention with the work that Proforest are doing. Next slide, please, Deborah. So as I said, with the company data that's coming through and will continue to come through over the next few weeks, hopefully, what we're trying to do is make more tangible connections between the production landscapes in Brazil and the high-risk areas and those product groups which are sold by industry in Europe. And we'll be reviewing and analyzing that data adopting a flexible and sort of experimental approach to this, because at this stage we don't know exactly what sort of data we're going to get back, how comparable those data sets are, and what sort of information it will contain. So we're being relatively flexible and just exploring the data to start with. The hope is that obviously we'll be able to make some tangible connections through to the points of production or trading actors, but we fully expect that a lot of the data will just leave us with heavy data gaps. So part of this process, as I mentioned earlier, will also be to identify those gaps and see whether there's anything that can be done about those going forward. At the moment, we're a bit data short. We've got 5 NDAs now, as Deborah mentioned, but it would be really great to get the data up on the platforms to allow us to start this work. We're still waiting for a few more data sets to make that process as efficient as possible. And as Deborah said, there's still time to submit that data as we go forward so that can be brought into this analysis. And just finally, just to reiterate that no confidential information at all will be shared between companies, and we have these strong data sharing agreements in place to ensure that that process is managed robustly without any risk of antitrust issues or confidentiality issues occurring. And a further point of clarification which has come up from a couple of members to date is that there are no plans to add or integrate any information being supplied from companies into the Trace platform. As I said, we will be learning from this process to improve the Trace platform, but there's no plans to integrate any data directly within it. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks very much, and please do get in touch or ask me any questions now if you've got further questions.
There was one question earlier about, sorry about that. There was a question earlier about sharing the link to the platform. We're happy to share the link to the platform after the webinar when we send the slides and the presentation, the slides and the video. Are there any other questions for Chris or the project team?
Jill has her hand up. I don't know if that's...
Which Jill? Jill Higgins.
Yeah.
Jill, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask a question.
Brilliant. Hi, everyone. Yeah, just a quick question on the data sets from companies. I'm wondering, I haven't seen them. Are these sort of like soy sourcing questionnaires that we could send to our suppliers, or is it just information on soy supply chains that companies have put together themselves? Or, I mean, is there a uniform template or anything?
So we did send out initially a template that outlined the sort of information that we were looking for, and if you haven't seen that, we can resend that to you. But essentially, what we're looking for initially, at least, is information that you probably already hold, rather than going out again and trying to engage with suppliers. Obviously, if we go forward and we identify potential gaps, what the plan is really is to keep active dialogue across the company base, so that we can understand that in the Soy Buyers Coalition team whether the data that you've supplied is comprehensive, or whether you've got opportunity to provide anything else, if there are particular gaps that you might be able to fill in. And at that stage, it may be appropriate or may not be appropriate to go and do some further investigation. But at this stage, it's really about understanding what you already have and then moving forward from there.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could send it. Maybe, apologies, Fiona Wheatley might have seen it before, but she's actually left M&S, so it's just myself at the moment. So anything you could send across to me would be fantastic. Plus, I also tried to access the platform, but I couldn't get in.
Great. We'll follow up with you directly then on that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or
I have a comment. Hi, Isabella Vitali from Proforest here. At this point, in terms of data and the kind of data, and you're probably thinking, do we have the data that they need? Is it useful? Is it enough? At this point, it's really important to understand what is it that you have, even if it's very little. Because understanding what the gaps are is also information that is relevant for this stage of the process. And from what we know of the level of information about the soy supply chain, there are very few companies that have a clear visibility of their supply chain. So we do expect lots of gaps. So don't be shy.
Yeah, and I'd just reiterate that I've had a couple of conversations with people who have said, oh, we're not sure we have the information that you require. And I think it's very much the case that the information that we require is the information that you might have already. So yeah, just do get in touch if you're unsure at all about any of that. And more than happy to talk further about that aspect.
Great, thank you, Chris. If there are no further questions, we'll move on to the risk analysis part, and Sebastian will present that. Hold for 1 second. Okay. Moving on to the risk analysis. Sebastian, I think it's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Deborah. This is Sebastian from Proforest. As Deborah and Chris said, Proforest is working on the risk analysis for this project, for the Soy Buyers Coalition. I'm leading on that, but most of the work will be done by Daniela, who might be also on this call. Chris has, I must say, we're just starting this work. So now the Trace team led by Chris has been working on selection of the priority regions, which is basically the step 1 in the risk analysis. So we want to identify the areas that we are interested in. But for the next step, so the risk analysis, we are just starting this work. So we haven't, there's not too much that I can show you. Can I have the next slide, please, Deborah? So based upon the Chris and his team, their work, we will select a number of priority regions we want to focus on, and these are the regions we want to conduct a more in-depth and detailed risk analysis. For now, we have identified those 3 areas in Mato Grosso, in Mato Piba, and then in the Amazon. Next slide, please. So step 2 then is we want to zoom in to those priority regions. We want to focus on 3 risk factors or risk criteria, which is deforestation, clearing of natural habitats, and illegal sources. And these risk factors are broadly highlighted by the Roundtable on Sustainable Soil and other initiatives in the soy sector. So these are the risk factors we will be focusing on. Deforestation is most important for this project, and we will make use of the Mabiomas dataset and LAPIG for that one. We are trying to compare the 2 datasets and see which of the datasets will yield the best results. Mabiomas also has information on natural habitats, so we will use Mabiomas for looking into that. And illegal sources, we will be looking mainly at embargoed areas by IBAMA, or clearing in protected areas or indigenous or Colombola territories. Instead of generating a lot of tables and quantitative data, we propose to generate more qualitative maps so that we can better understand what's happening on the ground, so we can put the deforestation or the clearing that is happening on the ground into perspective. So in order to better understand the drivers and the mechanisms behind these practices. Can I have the next slide, please, Deborah? So this is an example from Southeast Asia of such a map. I'm not saying it's going to look different, but this was quite, users of this map were quite happy with the results. So what we did, we created the scale you see from ranging from yellow to red is basically a deforestation heat map. So red means there's a lot of deforestation going on in that spot. And that information you overlay then with other layers you're interested in. For example, the green one, the green is indicating protected areas, and the brownish layers is peatland. So as I said, this is for Southeast Asia, but we're trying to develop similar maps for these areas of interest, and of course then overlaid with other data types as the clearing of natural habitats and illegality. So I think that's everything I can show you for now. I don't think there's another slide. Maybe Deborah can see that. If there are any questions, they would be welcome. Thank you.
Just to thank Sebastian. Just to add that we are now running a pilot to test this risk analysis approach on those key sourcing regions identified by TRACE, and this might be finished by this week or next week, and then we will be able to run the whole risk analysis covering all the priority sourcing regions, and this is still in line with the whole timeline that comprises the project, and that you can see on the project outline. So our aim is to have it finished by between May and June.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Marcelo, for that contribution.
And Isabella here again. So if I just can recap a bit for those with short memory like myself, the whole point of doing all of this is so that we are able to, well, putting together the work that TRACE is doing of linking the companies with specific regions, and then prioritizing those regions based on these key risk factors that are going to be tested now. And also zooming into the priority regions identified to understand why deforestation is really happening there, because that will help us with the second phase of all of this, which is going to be to understand what is happening in the regions that we decide to prioritize, what's already going on, the initiatives on the ground, either led by the government, the NGOs, the local companies, and are they enough to address deforestation? Is it a matter of just adding the supply chain support to them? Is it a matter of political support? Is it money that they need? Is it a nudge in the right direction? Is it a message? So that is the second phase. It's understanding, once we've defined where we need to focus, understanding collectively what are the reasons for deforestation in that area, what's happening, and then what is the role that this group of companies can have to support this change in the trend. So the idea is not to stay away from the risky areas, is to actually go and focus there, because that's where the biggest change can be achieved.
And Isabella touches on a really important point that's also been flagged as an important point for stakeholders such as traders, is that the point of this project is not to blacklist areas and tell members of the project not to source from those areas. Obviously, the decision to do that as individual companies is up to the individual company, but we won't do that as a group. We are looking for trouble and seeing how we can affect positive change in those areas as a group. Before I open up for questions, I'm going to throw out a few questions of our own. We talked in Oxford about predicting future deforestation. Obviously, you can't predict the future, but we did talk about looking into the risk of future deforestation or future conversion. My question is that also ongoing work in the risk analysis part, or will that be for another time?
So what we will do to predict future deforestation is, first of all, we will make use of most recent deforestation figures. Preliminary work in Southeast Asia again has shown that this is one of the best predictors of deforestation in the future. Is just look to the most recent data. Now, with most of these data layers, they always lag behind a few years. So I assume that for Mabiomas, the most recent data will be 2016. So we will make use of that data layer, because it just, I mean, obviously for the developers, it takes time to update these maps so every year they're updating this data. But I think at this moment only 2016 is available. That's the latest. Does that answer your question, Deborah?
Yep. Okay. There is one thing I should mention as well that wasn't mentioned earlier, and also a question more to the group, we talked a little bit about the stakeholders that we have to talk to and we have been reaching out to. Are there any stakeholders that the group feels that we should be reaching out to and haven't yet? That's a question to the companies. If you can't think of any now, you can always reach out through email and let us know. Okay. And what we'd also like to do, we did spend quite a while working in, I think we have a question from Sarah. The UK coalition is being quite active. Yep, we will, we have talked about the project with them, and we will be exploring how we can work a little bit closer together to make sure that our projects are aligned. So we're definitely going to keep in touch with the UK Soy Coalition. So as I was mentioning earlier, one of the things that, is someone...
Sorry. Yeah, Isabella, I just wanted to comment on the UK, I think it's the UK Soy Roundtable, right? I just wanted to mention what we initially discussed with them about I think the synergies between these two things is that the Soy Buyers Coalition is looking at how to implement some of the commitments, and the UK Soy Roundtable is about, I think, harnessing the collective power of the UK stakeholders. So reaching out to a broader constituency within the UK, getting them up to speed, and once they agree on the common strategies that they want to follow, they will be looking out for delivery mechanisms. So Soy Buyers Coalition can be one of these delivery mechanisms used by the members of the UK Soy Roundtable.
And just to add to that, I actually spoke to Jonathan Gorman from Ethica, who's helping coordinate the UK roundtable, and it's likely that the trace data base will play some sort of role in helping that grouping understand connections as well through to place of production. So there is a lot of opportunity to both align and make sure that we're talking to each other as we go forward.
Thank you, Chris and Isabella. One final point that I'd like to make before opening up for questions and discussion is, to date, we've been doing a lot of work in the background, and it does seem like there's not much happening if you're looking from the outside in. But what we'd like to do is, when we're getting companies on board and participating, we'd like to have more calls and meetings with the project members. And potentially looking to have a physical meeting within the next few months. We're trying to find a good time for that. Sorry, I'm getting a message from the webinar tech. We're looking for a suitable time to have a physical meeting somewhere together, likely alongside another meeting where some of the members will be. So with that said, I'll open it up to questions from the group. So what have you been afraid to ask so far and didn't have the chance before? Now is your time. And obviously you can always send questions via email if you haven't had the chance before. All right, it seems that the sound has muted everyone again, so I'm going to unmute everyone again. Sorry about that. Otherwise, you can put your hand up and on the little hand icon to ask a question. Okay, everyone is unmuted now. Okay, any questions?
Hi, Deborah.
That's Daniel, I think.
Yes, Daniel from Tesco here. Is there, looking forward, companies should be thinking about standardizing the data we're collecting and therefore reporting to you guys, in the coming years? Potentially, if we think about this long term, if you've had a sneak peek, some of the data we've sent through, is there any data points we're missing, or is the type of data we're already collecting in our own individual way, is that okay?
Chris, any feedback on that?
Yeah, so I think one of the ambitions, I think, as I sort of hinted at, was that what we'd like to see, I suppose, is a harmonization on that type of data, so that we can move towards a system which is going to be more efficient for everyone in this sort of activity. We haven't looked at your data yet, any of your data that's been uploaded as yet, because we haven't really had enough to warrant that exercise and have enough to compare between the companies ourselves. So we haven't started that process. I imagine that there will be a number of commonalities in there, but there are also obviously going to be significant differences based on the particular supplier model or relationship with suppliers that the individual companies have, and the position in the supply chain as well, with the differences between the retailers and the feed manufacturers, for example. So we are going to be working in a complex and different data landscape, which I think is fine. But yes, definitely one of the ambitions moving forward will be to at least provide some guidance on where we think things might be possible to harmonize, or where good practice might be in terms of data collection activity. So that would be the intention, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, Hi, it's Clément Ostillin from Avril Group. My question is, what is the deadline to provide data to Chris?
So there is no deadline. What we're hoping to do is really kick off on the data analysis of the companies in mid-May. So I would like, if possible, to have enough data sets there to start that process in mid-May. Otherwise, I think if we leave it much longer, then we will risk delaying the project. To date, it's not been too much of a problem because obviously we've spent a lot of time looking at the initial data coming from Trace and working out how we work together and getting those NDAs and data sharing agreements signed off. So we're not pushed for time in that sense, but my ambition is to really start kicking off that analysis and harmonization and making sure that we're talking to each other where we need a bit of back and forth to understand the data coming through around mid-May. So if possible, those of you who haven't or are interested in supplying data but haven't to date wish to do so, then I think mid-May would be a target date. If data does come in later than that, as I said, what we're trying to do as much as possible is be flexible here, and we will try to integrate that into the picture. I don't have a clear cut-off date, sort of the final cut-off date for that. But if you're concerned in any way about the fact that it might be later than mid-May, and you do want to be involved, maybe just drop me a line, and we can discuss how that might impact things.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any final questions before we close off? If there are no final questions, I'd like to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. I'd like to thank the project team as well for all of the work in the presentation webinar. As always, if you have any questions or any doubts, any concerns or comments, please feel free to get in touch with us. If possible, companies that are in the process of signing the NDAs or haven't yet signed, we'll do so. Please do so as soon as possible. If you have any questions about the data access agreement and the process, please feel free to get in touch. And working well on this project and looking forward to positive change on the ground, hopefully through this project. All right, with that said, any closing remarks, Chris, Marcelo, Isabella?
Just thank you very, very much for your attention and for being involved.
Same from our side. We are super excited about this. We believe that this is one of the most promising things out there in terms of collective action, and with a lot of potential to set a new way of working together. So we are super hopeful that this will deliver on a lot of the anxieties that companies have individually.
Great, thank you, everyone. All right, thank you, everyone, for joining, and we will be in slides with you shortly, and hope to speak to you soon.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. Great. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.